For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Raymond.
Thank you.
Now, you referred to the alliance having been consolidated in exile, and that the SACP came to play a role, or a powerful role. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yes, I think a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that within the ANC alliance, in the period of exile, the SACP was a type of elite. A lot of people wanted to be members of the Communist Party, but it was hard. Compared with being a member of the ANC, it was much harder to become a member of the Communist Party. You had to be asked to be a member. And the membership was secret in exile. And if you were recruited, you went through a period of probation, and they would not confirm your membership for a long time. So there are a lot of people who wanted to be members of the Communist Party in exile. And why they wanted this is there was prestige attached to being a member of the Communist Party. The Communist Party was regarded as people who had this record of incredibly selfless sacrifice, people like Bram Fischer. And in the 1930s even, Johannes Nkosi was killed in a past protest. So you had these examples of communist martyrs and famous leaders like Ruth First, Moses Kotane especially, and many others. So it had this prestige, but also when you were in exile, if you wanted special training, very often the Communist Party was in a position to facilitate your going for special military training, but also the prestige of the Communist Party was attached to its ideological role, that was seen as an organization that provided an understanding that was very advanced. And people very much wanted to go for special ideological training at the Lenin School in Moscow. That was something that people like Thabo Mbeki went for, Joel Netshitenzhe. A number of people who are no longer communists actually, at the time when the Communist Party was a leading force, they actually did seek the opportunity, get the opportunity to go and study ideologically at the Lenin School in Moscow. There had been training before this. People like Moses Kotane had never had formal schooling, but he attended the Communist University of the East in the 1920s. And people like Irina Filatova, who is actually anti-communist, says that some of the teaching there was in advance of what was taught at the London School of Oriental and African Studies. So the Communist Party was associated in many people's minds with having a clear understanding of how South Africa was composed, what were the factors that went into making it up, and also what were the strategies and tactics that were required to overthrow the apartheid regime. And in this period then, because of the prestige of the Communist Party, being a member of the Communist Party paradoxically made it more likely that you'd be elected to leadership in the ANC. In other words, a ticket to leadership in the ANC was to be a member of the Communist Party, in my understanding. And by the late 1980s, a majority of the members of the NEC may well have been communists, or even members of the Communist Central Committee.
How did the unbanning of the organizations affect the ANC-SACP relationship, and how did this link to COSATU?
See, I think that when the time when the organizations were unbanned, meant a fundamental change. First of all, organizations that had been illegal for 30 years in the case of the ANC, 40 years in the case of the Communist Party, had to re-establish themselves as legal organizations. And you couldn't just pick up from 1960 or 1950 because conditions had changed completely. Now the conditions that had changed completely were, on the one hand, nationally, that there was the possibility of creating a mass organization in completely new conditions. How people had been trained to be members of the ANC in exile, in MK and so forth, couldn't simply be transplanted to 1990. People had to work out what was the type of organization that had to be built, and the people who became members in one branch would be domestic workers, madams, leading ideologues, university teachers, etc., etc. So it was very complicated to build the ANC. And the Communist Party also had a problem. Now, the Communist Party's difficulties in rebuilding were linked to that period of history, what we call that conjuncture, when there was the collapse of the Soviet Union and other former socialist states. So it was a unipolar world, and the Communist Party had to ask itself, what went wrong? What do we learn from that? What does it mean for our understanding? What does it mean for the Marxism that they were teaching? And the Communist Party went through a lot of soul searching, with Joe Slovo writing his famous document, Has Socialism Failed? And they went through a number of revisiting of their ways of understanding. Now, the other thing that changed is that while the organizations were unbanned, they were also on the eve of becoming government. There was negotiations, but there was also the no peace, no war, that they were under attack from the apartheid regime. And in this period, while negotiations were going on, people were positioning themselves for the possibility of government. And I think it's important to understand that different people had different things in mind, and the revolutionary heritage, people were asking themselves what relevance this had in the 1990s, in some cases because they wanted positions, in some cases because they were coming into a terrain of negotiations.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about the tripartite alliances consolidation.